representation following a mass casualty event. Current law is that a special election needs to be held within 49 days in the event of a mass casualty if there's more than 100 vacancies in the House. So we sent you a letter just asking you to work with the Government Accountability Office and answer their questions. Can I just ask quickly, yes or no? Will you all work with the GAO and just respond to their questions? Can I just have an affirmative yes from everybody?
Yes.
Yes?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that. We will only be able to solve problems insofar as we understand the problem. So, and for you, Secretary Taloose Oliver, given your state's leadership of the National Association of State Election Directors and the National Association of Secretaries of State, both of whom we've spoken to about this before, could you just speak about the time and resources needed to effectively hold a special election from your perspective? And do you think the current law of 49 days is doable?
Thank you very much, Representative, for asking that question. So we actually recently modified our special election law in New Mexico. We have a 100-day time frame that's codified between when the vacancy occurs and when the election has to happen. And that was really compacting the time frame. We felt as short as we could possibly do it, with also having a well-prepared, accurate election that the voters are ready for, as well as election administrators. 49 days would be really pushing it. I mean, by federal law, we have to mail out ballots 45 days before an election, right? So that gives you 4 days between a vacancy being created, candidacies being nominated and declared, right? I mean, I just don't think that's realistic. I obviously understand the urgency of filling those seats, obviously, but it would be a huge challenge.
And the steps in the process, I mean, military voters, all of those sorts of things need to be accounted for as well, right?
Absolutely. Again, 49 days, okay, and then on day 4 of that period, you're already mailing out ballots to your uniformed military voters and overseas voters. I think that's just incredibly unrealistic.
So one of the things we're trying to figure out is, I mean, I hear 49 days and I think, man, that's a long time for Congress to be missing 100 members or more. Right, or in a mass casualty event. I mean, every time I go to the State of the Union, I think like, but for the grace of God, go we. So 49 days is a long time, and what I hear you saying is like that would be really hard to achieve.
Again, I think as election administrators, I think we can all say we're very used to making things work. We will make things work, whatever we have to do. You are not going to have as accurate an election, and it's going to be really hard for those election administrators to make that kind of time frame work in a way that ensures, that those overseas voters are getting their ballots, not to mention being ready for things like early voting and absentee voting in all the states. Very challenging time frame. Representative.
I thank you for your response, and thank you for each of you for being willing to work with the GAO. We're trying to figure out whether there's a better way to do this. So thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Congressman Loudermilk is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here. I appreciate the work that you guys do. Look, whether we like it or not, election integrity is a huge issue, bipartisan issue in this country, whether it's perception or reality. People have to have confidence in their elections. And the questioning of elections is on both sides of the aisle. It's not just one side of the aisle. In 2018, Georgia's gubernatorial election, Stacey Abrams refused to acknowledge her defeat by Brian Kemp, citing integrity of the Georgia election. So we see it on both sides. This is an issue that has to be addressed, and at least in Georgia, the largest concern is over mail-in ballots. Through studies over years and years, when there is fraud, and there is fraud in every election. I mean, we have to acknowledge that. It's an issue that's in our country. It's in every state. It's minimizing that fraud as best as we can to make sure that it doesn't affect the outcome of the election. And then we have to do it in such a way that it gives the populace confidence that we are at least trying our best to have an election that's full of integrity. So with that, Secretary Fontes, just to simplify things, I'll just address questions to you. In Arizona, like Arizona, many voters choose to vote by mail. Can you tell the committee what protections Arizona has in place to ensure mail-in ballots are actually going to voters at their correct mailing address? and that the signatures on the ballots match the signature Arizona has on file for each voter.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Loudermilk, first and foremost, I have to take umbrage with the notion that the conclusory statement that you made there is fraud in every election. That's just not true. It's never been proven.
You can,
and so I'll start there.
let me
As
ask
for the
you,
address
you can
verification
verify,
circumstance-
this is my time. You can verify to this committee that there is no fraud in any Arizona election. 100%.
It's an entirely different question than stating that there is fraud in every election. It's
I
a
don't s-
very
I-
different.
okay.
That's exactly what you said, sir.
I
But to
did
answer
say
your
that.
question, but
I
to
just
answer your
don't see
question,
the difference is if
to
I
answer
say
your, if
that-
you'd like me to answer your
Sir,
question,
the time belongs to me.
Yes, sir.
We can have an interaction, but you have to allow me to continue on with something you brought up. I don't see how there's a difference by saying that there is fraud in every election, and then you can't guarantee that you've never had an election without fraud. But this is, I think we have to be intellectually honest going forward, right? We deal with a constituency where not everyone abides by a common moral code, that we respect the rights of each other and we follow the rule of law. There are cheaters out there in every state. We can't fix the problem unless we're intellectually honest. So with that, if you could please now address the issue of how do you ensure mail-in ballots are actually going to voters at their correct mailing address, and how do you ensure that the signatures match those that you have on file?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Loudermilk, as to the address verification system that we employ in Arizona, which has been in place for a very, very long time, continuously updated. We use the National Change of Address database by the United States Postal Service. We use a first and second notice system to our county registrars, which will send a second piece of mail if we have returned election mail. And that second piece of mail is a second notice to the registrar. That back and forth communication via election mail, which is a little different than first class mail, it cannot be forwarded, by the way. So those are some of the techniques that we use, among others, but I would like to touch on the signature verification system that, again, we've been using for a very long time in Arizona, a couple of decades, as a matter of fact, that uses 3 layers of human eyeballs on these signatures. And these folks, by the way, I would argue are better than the signature checking folks in some law enforcement agencies, because they don't just do ballots on election day. As I indicated in my opening, we've already had 4 elections in Arizona. Guess what? Over 80% of our ballots on average now are by mail, and that means every single one of those ballots has to be signature verified. These are the same people trained by the trainers who train the FBI in their signature verification
Let me
process.
follow up on that. Are the signatures verified against the signature on the application or on the registration?
They are, well, that is essentially one and the same. And we keep a lot of those signatures in place to have a total voter record. And we will hopefully be able to, although there's been efforts against this, utilize the entire record of a voter's signature, because it changes. It adjusts over time. We get a little older. Sometimes you have something like Parkinson's or a physical injury that gets in the way. And because that does happen, if we have a mismatched signature, we make every effort to contact those voters, either by phone or email, or even employ some of the political parties to go chase down ballots where there are mismatches before the end of the cure period.
All right. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Representative Torres is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And once again, I also want to thank each and every one of you for being here today and for your bravery that you exercise every day. And I hope you are doing everything that you can to take care of the people that are employed under you, that you manage, because truly it is a scary time for all of you. Here we are 55 days before election and just days away from ballots, mail ballots going out across the U.S. and across the world to Americans abroad and military personnel. So election day is pretty much on top of us. But unfortunately, election officials and workers have seen a rise, again, in dangerous threats, harassment, and unprecedented attacks across the country. In fact, several witnesses here, if not all, have been direct victims of intimidation, violence at the hands of MAGA extremists who have been inspired by big lie conspiracies about election security. Let's be clear about where the responsibility lies here. The former President Trump and now their Republican nominee for president took to social media just this past weekend threatening to jail election officials and casting doubt once again about the integrity of the 2024 elections in the event that he loses, because the loser can't lose. So let's also be clear. It's not just elected officials who face threats and intimidation. Last year, a jury ordered Rudy Giuliani, former President Trump's lawyer, to pay $148 million for defaming a Georgia election workers who were forced to go into hiding because of the violent threats against them. In July, a man was sentenced to 14 months in prison for sending a death threat to a Michigan election worker after the November 2020 election. And in Florida, the governor's election police are going down door to door harassing petition signers. Secretary Benson, in your testimony, you mentioned that you yourself have been threatened, and as has your staff and election officials across Michigan. How has this constant mis and disinformation impacted your office and election workers that you employ?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for that question, and thank you all for your questions today. I really want to emphasize the power of evidence, first and foremost, when it comes to election administration or any alleged irregularities. That's really what I think has to be at the heart of any type of concerns that are expressed, evidence of wrongdoing, evidence of irregularities. And when it comes to evidence in these most recent years, there has been none, despite multiple investigations and audits by committees in our state and in many others. So in the absence of that evidence, that's why, although I understand, and people do and should have rightly placed faith in our elections, and I understand the concerns that people have as a result of allegations that are thrown around quite flippantly, I think, by a lot of leaders today, the results of meritless requests and meritless accusations and false rhetoric is that people show up on my doorstep when I'm inside trying to hang Christmas decorations with my 4-year-old son, with screaming into a megaphone, "You're a murderer and you should be arrested and tried for treason." That's the reality of all this. That's actually who it impacts. Those of us who are just trying to do our jobs with integrity because we love our jobs. Every single one of us is professionals who signed up for this work because we believe in making sure every voice is heard, not just one party's voice, every voice, every vote being counted that's valid. And the fact that now all of us, including election workers, who also sign up to do this work with pride for very little pay, are now at the result of lies and misinformation on the other side of threats and rhetoric that make us afraid to go to work, afraid to go grocery shopping, afraid to take our kid to school, afraid to go into our backyard because we don't know what might be lurking in the bushes. And that's real. That's what we've experiencing not just this last week, but these last 4 years. And so I hope that that story or those stories can be in the minds of everyone as you go into this election season.
Thank you for your testimony, and I yield.
Congresswoman Bice is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the ranking member for bringing us together today. Ms. Benson, I want to start out by saying I need you to be on notice that 10 million non-citizens have entered this country illegally, and municipalities across the country are allowing them to vote in local elections. If states can't keep one voter roll registration clean, imagine keeping two separated. So let me start by addressing Secretary Byrd, LaRose, and Warner. Clearly, the Democrat secretaries here have engaged in get-out-the-vote efforts that the Biden administration is spearheading. And certainly, I don't know if you've been contacted and asked to participate in any of these programs, but in my opinion, voter registration is incredibly important. However, I think the SBA should be focused on their sole mission, which is helping small businesses across this country be successful. I think the Department of Education should be focused on fixing their failed FAFSA rollout and not focused on registering voters. It's absurd that the administration has defied 2 subpoenas regarding that get-out-the-vote effort. Have either of you, Mr. Byrd, Mr. LaRose, or Mr. Warner, been contacted about these get-out-the-vote efforts?
We have not, and we have not had any evidence or reports of federal agencies in Florida doing that. And if they were to request, we wouldn't allow them. But we've gone even further, and our state voter public assistance agencies that serve as VRAs under the NVRA, we have now instructed them that they are not, if someone reports as being a non-citizen, that they report that to us so we can compare it against the voter rolls. And we specifically prohibit them from offering them voter registration forms if they report as a non-citizen.
Quickly, Mr. LaRose and Mr.
I helped
Warner.
lead an effort to sue the Biden administration to stop this foolish executive order, so I think they know better than to ask me.
Mr. Warner.
We have specifically written the White House asking them to rescind that order because it's unconstitutional, that executive order.
Thank you. I want to start with you, Secretary Fontes. Following the Supreme Court's infamous 2013 decision in the Arizona tribal, Arizona had to move to a system where it requires proof of citizenship for those registering to vote in state elections, but no proof for those using the federal form to register to vote in a federal election. Can you tell the committee how many federal-only voters there are in Arizona?
Mr. Chair.
Your microphone.
Mr. Chair, Congresswoman, as we've heard, those rolls change every day. We are at approximately 44,000 at this time. The 2/3 of them are under 24 years of age, and as I indicated earlier, 13 to 17% of them are members of Native American tribes or have addresses on tribal lands.
How many voters are there that can vote in all elections?
We're over 4 million.
What is the effect on Arizona's elections following the Supreme Court late August order of the Republican National Committee versus Mi Familia Vota? Are you providing individuals who are denied registration for failing to provide documentary proof of citizenship with the state voter registration form, with the federal form, to encourage individuals to circumvent the DPOC requirement that was just upheld by the Supreme Court?
We've issued guidance to all of our voter registrars across the state with legal counsel at our side from the Attorney General's office to comply with the U.S. Supreme Court ruling. I think it is very important for folks to understand that the information gathered on each of those forms is exactly the same. And so while we will follow the law as indicated by the United States Supreme Court, again, these efforts will result in the reduction of the capacity of some U.S. citizens from being able to vote.
My time is limited. I would like to request unanimous consent to submit a letter from Kevin Kline and Gina Swoboda to Secretary Fontes for the record.
Without objection.
So it's the case that a voter that registers in Arizona on the Arizona form, their application will not be processed unless they provide proof of citizenship. Is that correct?
It is the state of the law, and that is what we have advised our voter registrars. That is correct.
But voters can still register with the federal form to vote in a federal election, provide no proof of citizenship, and be allowed to vote in November.
That's exactly how you vote in your district, ma'am.
Actually, I have voter authorization and voter ID in my state. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Representative Carey from the state of Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the chairman. I also want to thank the witnesses for being here today, two of whom I've known for many years. It's good to see both. And I really appreciate you all traveling this way. And obviously, having Ohio's own Secretary of State here is quite an honor. As my colleagues have already mentioned today, this presents us a critical opportunity to ensure the safeguarding, I think all of you have said this, of Americans' elections. In fact, earlier this week, my dear friend Mr. Morelli from across the aisle, we did a bill together, the COCOA Act, or the Confirmation of Congressional Observers Act, bipartisan bill. This bill was another example of just the common sense bipartisan legislation that we do on this committee that ensures confidence with Americans. So I'm going to turn a little bit to Secretary LaRose, if you don't mind. If you recall, I believe it was in June of this year, our Governor, Mike DeWine, signed into law a new campaign finance provision to prevent foreign nationals from engaging in Ohio's elections. Now, for those of you who don't know, we have an issue 1 ballot that is actually going to be up in November. And if the numbers that I'm seeing are correct, over $26 million has been spent on the yes vote, of which a large portion of that came from foreign entities, and only about 200,000 from 26 million. Think about this, $26 million raised, only 200,000 actually came from the state of Ohio. So a lot of people outside of Ohio had a lot of interest in what Ohio was doing in its election. Can you talk about why this change was needed? I kind of pretty much laid it out there for you, Mr. Secretary, but if you would, please.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Unfortunately, it is needed because there are foreigners who think that they have a role in Ohio's elections, including, by the way, a Swiss billionaire who, the day the governor called the special session to pass the bill barring foreign people from contributing, made a contribution because he was trying to get in under the wire. $6 million Hans-Georg Weiss gave to an issue in Ohio.
What was his name again? I just want to make sure we're clear on this.
Hans-Georg Weiss, the same guy that funds a fake news operation in Ohio that, of course, supports the issue that he's funding as well.
And he is from Switzerland, just so we're clear.
The country of Switzerland. Yes, fondue, Swiss cheese, all of that. Yep.
Okay. All right. So how does the law that the governor signed prevent foreign nationals from engaging? And I know he kind of tried to circumvent the system, giving the time frame, but how has it changed in now?
Well, unfortunately, it's currently not in effect because of a ruling by a federal judge. We are appealing that because, again, Ohioans want us to keep foreign actors out of our elections. And so, unfortunately, that law is on hold right now.
So it's something that Ohioans wanted, but we have a judge that is trying to say that. Can you give me a little more details about
Yeah, so it was based on the inclusion of permanent legal residence in the legislation. We kind of warned the legislature they may not want to include permanent legal residence, and that is the part that has caused this to be held up by the federal court.
And can you give me the number that our friend from Switzerland, again, donated to this cause?
$6 million. The day the governor called the special election to outlaw foreign donations.
Unbelievable. Listen, I don't have much time left, but but quickly, in Ohio, like Florida, many voters choose to vote by mail. Can you tell the committee what protections Ohio has in place to prevent mail-in ballot fraud?
Yeah, it starts with maintaining accurate voter rolls. We remove deceased voters on a monthly basis. Of course, we check the identification of someone when they request an absentee ballot. We don't mail out unsolicited absentee ballots, which would be a foolish idea, in my opinion. We also allow people to track their ballots. You go to our website, you can track your ballot and make sure that it's received. These are just a few of the safeguards that we have in place.
Again, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here and appreciate your time. And unfortunately, we do have two committees that are running simultaneously. I would like to hear the rest of the questions, but I am going to have to go. But it's good to see you both, my friends, and look forward to seeing you again. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. We now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. D'Esposito, for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking his questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here this morning, this afternoon. Obviously, the most important, one of the most important things we face is to make sure that our elections are fair and that our elections are secure. And I think it's one of the biggest concerns of the American people. And I want to thank our chairman for his leadership over the 118th Congress in really focusing and honing in on how to make these elections more secure, to make sure that they are fair, to make sure that American citizens are the ones voting in the American process. And I've heard, not only today, but throughout conversations, that people are saying, well, there's the amount of non-citizens voting is not really significant. So I have to really, this is a question for everybody, because it's one that really should keep people up at night. What is the red line, right? Democrats say that there is not a significant number of non-citizens registered to vote, but yet there's still evidence of non-citizens on voter rolls, right? So we're being told by Democrats that it's not a significant number, but yet they're still on the voter rolls. So I'm going to start, I guess, from right to left, left to right, and just, I guess, tell us, what's the red line? What is the number that we think makes it significant? What is the number that would require the federal government to implement policies to prevent non-citizens from voting in our elections, one of our most sacred rights?
Congressman, it should be a zero-tolerance policy. In Florida, in 2000, 537 votes separated President Bush from Senator Gore. Small numbers matter in elections. Our current Speaker of the House lost his first race by 2 votes. If there were 3 illegal votes, that is overwhelming to his race. There should be a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to non-citizens.
Agree, zero tolerance. Every year, dozens of elections in Ohio come down to a single vote, and those are usually local elections, but those matter. We say every vote matters, we mean that, and we should not allow any non-citizens to be on our voter rolls.
I agree 100% with the previous 2 comments. Zero tolerance.
Agreed, and it is already illegal for non-citizens to register and vote, and I completely agree with that.
I agree as well. We're doing everything we can to ensure that non-citizens are not able to vote and that only U.S. citizens vote in our election. And it's working. There's no evidence that non-citizens are voting. If they were, it would be easy to prove since voting records are public. And despite numerous organizations spending a lot of money to try to convince people that non-citizens are voting, none of these groups have actually been able to provide any evidence of it.
I'll save you time and just say I agree, sir.
Okay. Mr. LaRose, I'm going to let you follow up on the statement from Ms. Benson.
We found 135 this year that had voted. We found another 400 that were registered but hadn't yet voted. And this idea that it's already illegal. It's illegal to hijack airplanes, but we don't get rid of the TSA.
It's also illegal to use fentanyl and smuggle fentanyl into the country. It's also illegal to come across our southern border and not face asylum, right? It's also illegal for many things. It's illegal to carry guns in some of our bluest cities and states, but yet every day there is more and more gun violence. So I think what we're seeing here is that perhaps we need a better definition of the term significant, because I think if one person that is not an American citizen has the ability to vote in our election, there is a serious problem. As was mentioned by many of our witnesses, our elections are coming down to just dozens or hundreds of votes. We had a state assembly race in my congressional district just 2 years ago where it came down to 138 votes. So yes, every vote does count, and as we continue to sit here and try to deny the fact that there are non-citizens not only registering but actually voting in our elections, it is clear that that is not a fact, because there are people casting ballots throughout this country that are non-citizens. And I believe after the last 3.5 years where we've saw 3.5, or I should say over close to 15 million people come across our southern border, we would be lying to ourselves to think that some of them are not going to take the opportunity to vote. So with that, I think that this committee continues to do the work that we do to secure our elections. I want to thank you all for your work, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. We now recognize Ms. Lee, the former Secretary of State of the state of Florida, for 5 minutes for asking her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important hearing, and to all of our witnesses who are here today. It is indeed a pleasure to see you. As Florida's former Secretary of State, I appreciate how important your jobs are and how critical your jobs are to American confidence in elections and ensuring that we have free and fair elections in the United States. So thank you to all of you for being here today. Secretary Byrd, I'd like to go back to you. You mentioned in your opening a couple of concepts that I think are very important as it relates to public confidence and really an example of some of the best practices that we could see in elections in our country. I'd like to start with voting systems and transparency. Is it correct, Secretary Byrd, that the Florida Department of State tests and certifies every voting system before it is used in an election?
That is correct.
Is it also true, Secretary Byrd, that before an election, local election officials perform testing and auditing of those systems again before they are used?
Yes.
And that testing and auditing of the election systems prior to every election is open to the public, is it not?
Absolutely open to the public.
And would you tell us this, while voting is going on during elections, are those voting systems ever connected to the internet?
They are not connected to the internet.
In other words, Secretary Byrd, is it possible to hack a voting system during an election?
It is not.
Would you tell us, Secretary, why it is you think that these measures you've just described are important and how they relate to public confidence in elections?
Well, everything we do in Florida is to build voter confidence. And while we have 67 counties and 67 supervisors of elections who are independently elected constitutional officers, we have a uniform election code, and it's my job and your former job as the chief elections officer of the state to make sure that we accommodate the needs of our largest county in Miami-Dade and our smallest county in Liberty County, that they can all operate with different resources and funding at the county level, but they also follow the state law.
I'd like to go back to something else that was mentioned earlier in this hearing. There was reference made to what was described as Governor DeSantis's election police. In fact, Secretary Byrd, is that not the Florida Department of State's Office of Election Crimes and Security?
It is. It was one of the governor's top election integrity priorities to create the Office of Election Crimes and Security. That office, which is housed in the Department of State, we investigate allegations of election fraud and crimes. And I think it's really important to note that people think, when they think election fraud, they think of the presidential race. Election fraud includes campaign finance violations, voter registration fraud, initiative petition fraud, candidate qualifying fraud. We investigate all of those. And for all of the people who say there is no evidence of non-citizens voting and all of the, come to Florida. We have the evidence because I'm required, my office is required to report it to the governor and the legislature every year.
And if you would, touch on the petition gatherers, what that is, and explain for us why that is harmful to both the public and the elections process if there's fraud occurring during the petition gathering process.
Those initiative petitions change or have the potential to change our state constitution. They enshrine, if they pass, they enshrine it in state law. There are organizations and businesses that send people from out of state into the states, pay them to gather signatures. We have victims of felony identity theft. They have come and reported that to us, that their signature has been put, that their identity has been stolen, their signature has been placed on a signature petition. We have a duty and obligation to investigate and provide relief to those victims, but also most of the reports of election fraud in Florida are reported by the county elections officials. It is happening, and it is our duty under the law to investigate.
And then one of the things, this question I'll direct to all of our secretaries who are here with us today. One of the things that we've heard discussed during this hearing is the Election Observer Program, which Congress administers across the country. And this committee runs that program, and we deploy trained congressional staff and send them around as those observers in elections offices around America. And I would like to hear from each of you on really just a yes or no if your office is prepared and ready to welcome these election observers during this election cycle. We'll start with you, Secretary Byrd.
Yes, we welcome them.
Proudly.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Happy to have them.
Right. Thank you all. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for appearing before us. It's been helpful. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for you.